with that, I want to turn our attention to our next online participant, who is Ms. Riyanti DJALANTE. I hope I pronounced that well. She's joining us remotely as our discussant to what you've heard from our panels. Dr. DJALANTE is the Assistant Director and Head of the Disaster Management and Humanitarian Assistance Division with the ASEAN Secretariat. She joins us remotely today, and I wish to hand the floor over to you, Dr. DJALANTE, to reflect on what you've heard from our speakers, and of course to inject your own thoughts on the matter. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Can I check if the audience in Japan and online can hear me well?
Indeed.
Thank you. So thank you very much, Mr. Ronald of UNDP, Director Murakami of CAO Japan, IRP Secretariat for inviting ASEAN Secretariat to be the discussion in this distinguished panel. I would also like to acknowledge the ASEAN Committee on Disaster Management, particularly our working group on preparedness, response, and recovery, who are also invited to join this distinguished forum. So allow me to highlight on my role of discussion on what are the key lessons that I would like to highlight from the 4 experiences that we have heard: Hurricane Katrina, Christchurch earthquake, the Kashmir earthquake, and also in the Philippines, and on top of that, highlighting some of the relevant ASEAN disaster recovery experience. So building from this lesson learned, then I would like to then bring the audience on asking, are we moving forward toward this direction for long-term recovery and resilience? So highlighting the key lessons learned, key factors and the lessons learned from the presentation today. Example from the USA, Dr. Johnson highlighted recovery management as a function of money, information, collaboration, and time. It needs to be a science-driven recovery with resilience policy, and also highlighting the importance of asset and people focus. The example from New Zealand from Honorary DALZIEL, highlighting on institutional learning, particularly the roles of indigenous people and traditional knowledge. On top of that, it needs to be community-driven along with the strong youth and female leadership. From the lesson from Pakistan, Lieutenant General Nadeem highlighted the challenges of finance, scale, time sensitiveness, but also bringing forward comprehensive approach that needs to also be pro-poor, in situ, particularly on land tenancy and also landless situation. The lesson from the Philippines from Senior Usek SADAIN, highlighting infrastructure resilience, importance of pre-disaster investment for risk reduction, introducing this terminology, build better, more, and also highlighting the recent experience from the typhoon series from 2020 onwards. So taking from this experience that happens nationally with the, at the national level, how then ASEAN as a regional organization differs or same in the way that we conducted our policy and planning for disaster recovery. We are one of the regions that is very vulnerable to disasters, and we learn a lot from this experience. From the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, we conducted the special ASEAN leaders meeting on the aftermath quake and tsunami summit immediately in 2005, and we used this opportunity, of course, that the major experience and opportunity for also introducing major development for our response and also recovery. Cyclone Nargis in 2008 is one of the first time by which ASEAN led a coordinated response and some indication on recovery. 2013 Typhoon Haiyan, ASEAN also conducted our regional response, and some then work on recovery. And finally, in 2018, from the Palu triple earthquake in Indonesia, ASEAN through the AHA Center, we we were involved in recovery of the reconstruction of 100 housing units, which we call ASEAN Village. So how does, what kind of lessons that we learn like from these major mega disasters, what we that we call it, that happens in the region towards strengthening our recovery capacity? The ASEAN Committee on Disaster Management specifically have a working group on recovery, so that recovery initiative with under PP4, which we did pre-disaster program regional recovery, as well as our preparedness for regional recovery assistance from large-scale disasters. This is which I think very clear, possibly in need in major regions of the world, by which, for example, earthquake or flood or typhoon may be potentially cross boundaries and need regional assistance. So what we did following this, developing regional policies and guidelines, establishing training capacity, developing tools, as well as convening of actors on recovery forum. We have our major publication on ASEAN disaster recovery reference and guide. So taking the lessons from the examples that we presented and also ASEAN, let's ask question, are we ready for a long-term recovery and hence building resilience in the future? Let me highlight some key points here. The lesson from the USA state that recovery management is a function of money, information, collaboration, and time. Let me highlight it on these roles of multi-sectors, multi-level. This is where ASEAN as this regional organization then comes into play when mega disasters occur. The role of international and regional organization matters. It's about working and building on existing structure, breaking barriers and silos. We know, for example, the formation of forum, networks, platform, and task forces are necessary. From this collaboration, also we see leadership is very important. At our level, at the regional level, we have our Secretary General who also have the role as a humanitarian assistance coordinator. It's about coordinating humanitarian response, but also in the recovery, moving in the scale of in the phase of recovery, resource mobilization, convening of this recovery forum, and so on, and ensuring also whole of ASEAN approach in disaster response in recovery. The second issue that I would like to highlight is on this institutional learning. Institutional learning needs to occur pre-disaster and post-disaster. So policy, structure, and guidelines needs to be there. Disasters, we need to be able to anticipate and utilize disasters as an opportunity to introduce major changes. From our experience, 2004 Indian tsunami, in 2005, we have the ASEAN Agreement on Disaster Management and Emergency Response. This is one of the first in the world by which regionally major policy and regulatory guidelines. From the 2004 NARGIS, we introduced AHA Center to coordinate response and in the future on recovery. And we believe, of course, for example, Japan and also examples from New Zealand, when major disaster occurred, the government is very quick to introduce, use this opportunity to introduce major building regulation and so on. Of course, key sectors beyond what have been presented before is important. Housing, infrastructure, but also business, economy, finance, and insurance. And we heard all the time in the long term, resilience, health, psychology, and resilience is very much something that we need to move forward. And of course, our basic risk reduction and mitigation activities needs to be strengthened more. We heard from the audience on the need for science-driven people and community focus. It's about building trust, confidence and also having a common vision. Climate change is increasing complexity of disasters, and we need the role of science to then, bringing us some of the how the future will look like, but also, some of the innovative innovative strategies that have been very common in science to be brought forward to help us conducting our decision making. And finally, of course, highlighting the future of technology, artificial intelligence, global capitals and financial flows. We have resilience finance, climate finance, loss and damage finance, which have been highlighted. I see this as a future for our approaches to strengthen long-term resilience. So thank you very much, Jackson, for our intervention.
Thank you, Dr. DJALANTE. I do know that it is always a challenge when you have to react to a number of very interesting points, and certainly in terms of reflecting on it from your side. But we do have some time, not as much time as we would want, but I want to turn our attention to the audience who would have posed some questions, and to the panelists who I want to invite to reflect on these questions and to feel free to engage in perspectives as you so moved. I'm not going to target any one particular panelist on these questions, but to open it up a little bit. So we have here a question on the importance of infrastructure recovery, which has been highlighted by several speakers, especially in roads, paths, and highways. How have we built back better over the longer run in cities that are already lacking adequate infrastructure? So they went into these types of crises, with a lack of adequate infrastructure to sustain their economies. How do we then, build back better over the longer run in these particular contexts? Any one of the panelists would like to reflect on that a little bit?
No, infrastructure plays a very vital role in the entire recovery effort. First, when you are doing the relief and the entire infrastructure is down, you have to build temporary roads and bridges to make sure that you can reach the affected population. But when it comes to recovery, in an area like we had the earthquake, what we did was that we looked at all these roads and bridges, and even educational institutions and health institutions, they were made to cater for a certain amount of population or the traffic density when they were made maybe 20 years back. So we looked at what is the dependent population or the traffic that is going to go through now, for which we continue to have traffic jams. So we upgraded it. But in case of bridges, we looked at what will it be hence 20 years from now or 15 years from now, and then enhanced its specification to 15 years in the future. Now, this is easier in the rural areas. This may not be very easy in the urban areas, and because for that you will need to have, you have to widen the road, and that means, taking away some of the markets or the individual housing, and that's a challenge. And that's the place, if the government can provide alternative spaces for relocating, which is equally attractive, probably it work. But otherwise, it's going to be a huge kind of a problem between the local population and the government.
Please, Dr. Johnson, if you, anyone is open to your reflections to.
Well, I want to pay deference to the Undersecretary of Infrastructure, but I just wanted to make an important point, is that I think too often our urban environments, the physical aspects that we see are the structures themselves. And much of our standards for construction have been around ensuring that the buildings are prevent collapse, life safety. That's a typical engineering structural standard. We're moving in the United States. New Zealand is also moving in this direction of really thinking of buildings as larger than just the structure itself, but a functional recovery standard. Thus, the building needs to be able to perform its function after it has reached or experienced its design load, whatever that could be, wind, earthquake load, et cetera. And that, for the first time, is going to force these two worlds together of thinking about infrastructure and our standards for the infrastructure, which is often hidden, and then the building's ability to perform its function after a disaster. You can't do functional recovery unless you also have infrastructure that's resilient and functioning. And so I'm very hopeful that that is actually a way forward in which we can actually bring infrastructure up to the surface, make it more real and known or thought about in a community, because it's so often sort of hidden and out of sight in some ways. And then New Zealand has a wonderful example of the Stronger Christchurch Infrastructure Rebuild Team, which Mayor DALZIEL may want to speak about. But I think what they did in approaching an ordered, designed process for rebuilding the city's 5 aspects of horizontal infrastructure is really commendable. They did that project in 5 years. They had incentives to the construction teams to do it. They had a huge community outreach and engagement throughout the process, so people would know what neighborhoods were what roads were going to be closed, what neighborhoods were going to be impacted, so people could adjust their commuting patterns, et cetera, during that time frame. So a really excellent project. It's called SKIRT.
So I'm going to pause.
I'm happy to follow on from that, because I would say that that was one of the most exemplary opportunities that were taken after the earthquakes, was to actually bring together an alliance of companies, but bring the council, the government and the Transport Authority together in a governance structure to get the alliance to operate without the silos. And I think that's my point about silos can be a barrier to really achieving the speed and also the success. The council itself put additional money aside for what we called, now I can't remember, but it was an improvement fund. So if you were putting back beyond the capacity that had previously been there, you weren't just building back what was there before, but you were building capacity, then the additional funding was made available as well. So I think the SKIRT model, and there's quite a lot been written about it as well, and a good lessons learned model, because it was a model that was picked up and adopted in a subsequent earthquake in the Huranui Kaikoura area of New Zealand. So I would certainly recommend it, and thank you, Laurie, for mentioning it.
We have lots of wonderful questions here, and I want to see if I can get 2 more in, and certainly then we can have Emil come in on some of these. From Gary. This question around bureaucratic processes which can hinder recovery efforts, as we've seen in Haiti and also in the Philippines. Time compression comes into play with bidding, permits, environmental and social assessments and safeguards that take time. It's a process. The longer it takes, losses are exacerbated. Any recommendations from your experiences in addressing this kind of challenge?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Sendai framework is actually a perfect step board to address an efficient disaster risk reductions program. The Philippine government, in its embark to have a build program in 2017, we account to those Sendai framework as a basic references among the others. And believe me, because the program itself has gone to a more bigger context of planning all the way to actual constructions. In fact, the first massive program that we had under the last administrations of the 30 administrations, actually, we have seen how efficient the program can be attained by also engaging a whole nation approach in government, and plus the involvement of the private sectors and the community base, where everybody has to feel that there's a sense of belonging to every development, be it good or bad, still that reflects the whole nations. And if you go to the Asian perspective, it goes and applies also the same purpose. For the build programs of the Philippine government, which is now sustained by President Bongbong Marcos under his administrations, has already almost completed some of these big-ticket projects. The first inter-island bridges we had in northern Mindanao, that connects one island to another island. It's about 3.6 kilometers long. The Panggil Bay Bridge will be completed this December 2023. And there's also the 32 kilometers, the first longest bridge so far that we had in Luzon, that would connect Cavite all the way to Bataan. That would start off also for the procurement second half of this year. And we have also the Panay Guimaras Negros Island. That is also account to 32 kilometer stretch bridge. Also in Central Visayas is also one of the projects that we're also pushing through under these administrations. And the first tunnel to be completed by 2026, funded by JICA, and that's actually in Davao City Bypass. So you could see that coming up with these huge programs, the huge planning, can always be attained if you have the involvement of the whole sectors of government, inclusive of the private sectors and the local government units. So I think everything is possible as long as we have the focus, we have the objectives, and we have the means to communicate each other, and we can attain a more better life for everyone. Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Actually, I'll just relate to the question, and if I understood it correctly, the time versus the bureaucratic procedures which are sluggish and slow. What I did in the Earthquake Reconstruction and Rehab Authority, I had people coming in from 3 different sectors. I had people from the military, and the military is good to give speed, right? You just tell them and you be sure that it will be done. Second, I got the technical consultants from the market. This was the brain. They wrote all the strategies, the plans, and everything.
Quality.
Yeah, and the third thing was the bureaucrats. Tell me a way out to do the things quickly. They would first tell me that this is the procedure, but if you do this also, there will be no audit objection. So from the military, I got the speed, from the technical guys, I got the brain, and from the bureaucrats, I got to know how to circumvent the procedures while still remaining legal. So maybe that's the combination that can work.
Excellent, excellent. So let's move on. This question around transformative actions that have come out of your processes that you've been able to sustain. I'm very keen to hear from all of you. I mean, in your case, you've said that there were lessons that were not learned 2005 to 2010. We've fast forwarded 2010. And certainly in Pakistan, we've seen recent floods. Would you identify any transformative actions that came from the past in managing these large-scale disasters that would have been sustained in the Pakistan case, particularly as you reflect on the journey now from the 2022 floods in Pakistan? And that's in your case. Emil, any transformative experiences from the recovery processes in the Philippines that you would want to point to, and that is being sustained by your government? And of course, Dr. Johnson and former Mayor DALZIEL, any thoughts on anything that, and particularly in your case, anything that came out of the Christchurch experience that is transformative and sustained? I know you spoke to the community volunteering program that has been sustained, but anything else you want to point to?
Sure. I think the slide that I put up that referred to the area that had been cleared of residential housing alongside the river, that really had built an area of sustainability for the city in terms of flooding. And that wouldn't have happened before. It was an incredible opportunity, really, and it's a great legacy for the city as a whole. So it's 4 times the size of our biggest park. We have a park about the size of Central Park in Christchurch, and then this is 4 times its size again. And building wetlands by planting, by encouraging future generations to get involved in it, as well as building a co-governance relationship with Indigenous peoples in terms of of how it's governed in the future. An incredible transformative sense of possibility that has emerged from what would have otherwise have been a complete disaster.
Amazing.
I just wanted to note what Lianne said about Christchurch. I think the co-governance with Indigenous peoples really set the standard in the country. There was already, much acknowledgement in New Zealand in ways that we have not in America. acknowledged and done reparations. But I think that the process of recovery not only was co-governance in the institutional sense, but actually was done so in the physical sense. So artwork that's embedded, sidewalks aren't just paved back with regular paved cement. They actually have indigenous symbols and artwork embedded into them. So it's actually just permeates you as you go through the rebuilt areas. And similarly, I would say in New Orleans, the transformation in governance in the state of Louisiana and in New Orleans has been huge as a result of Katrina. And I think that's really the legacy, to now have co-design, co-planning processes with the community instead of top-down directive kind of planning, which had existed before Katrina. And the inclusion of all, not having a segregated approach to community engagement, which had existed in Louisiana until that time. So now all people, all classes of people are involved in decision-making in a way that hadn't existed before.
So, gentlemen, you've been spared. Unfortunately, I'm out of time.
Okay.
And I would have loved to have heard from you, but I have to respect the incoming panel, sadly. But I want to take this opportunity to quickly thank our panelists. Can you give them a round of applause? They've been quite fantastic. You talk about compression. They've had to try to compress, years of experience into 10 minutes, and it's often a challenge. So, again, thank you very much for your insights. I've taken away some very important points, and I'm sure our audience have too. And to our audience online and present here, for your questions, we were unable to ask all of them, but certainly we take note of them, and they may feature again as we go through this particular process. Thank you, and over to you, Madam Moderator.